Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature.
This is Season 10, Episode 5, The Riddles, which covers Chapter 5 of The Hobbit.
The pretty famous chapter, Riddles in the Dark.
Riddles in the Dark.
Chapter 5 of The Hobbit.
Basis for Vin Diesel's Chronicles of Riddick.
That's not canon.
I have never seen those movies, but I love how many opportunities in this show there are to talk about them.
I think I've seen like more than one of them, and I could not tell you what they're about or what happens in them.
And that's all you need to know. You can move on. We don't need to talk about Vin
I think
Diesel
I watched
anymore.
one on a date once, and they're the most forgettable movies ever made.
Yeah.
Well, let's not spend any more time talking about forgettable movies from the mid-2000s. And
instead, we're going to talk about the Hobbit, the movie adaptations of The Hobbit.
We are not going to do that. Not here. We'll do that on the dancing lawn.
You got to pay for that.
Actually, I should pause and tell you, I do here. Cool thing for people to find out. We will probably have covered it by now, by the time this episode airs. In the dancing lawn, you don't know this, Phil, because future you hasn't recorded it yet. But there is the very, very first adaptation of The Hobbit was a 12-minute cartoon that was made just to keep the rights of The Hobbit. And it barely follows the book and has like fairies in it, and not elves, but like little fairies and all kind of wild stuff. And we're going to watch that. It's on YouTube. We're going to watch it together for one of the dancing lawns and talk about it.
It's the same group that put together the Star Wars holiday special.
Pretty much. We're not going to cover this, at least not yet. There is I think like 8 or 10 part miniseries made in Finland of the Lord of the Rings that came out in the 90s.
Oh.
Like live action.
Did you know that Russell Crowe was going to be the king in Lord of the Rings?
Like Aragorn the king?
Yeah.
Or, okay. He has a name. Did you forget his name?
I was giving you an opportunity.
No, I didn't know that.
Peter Jackson approached him and said, "Would you like the part of Aragorn?"
Sure.
And Russell Crowe said, they're both from New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I could tell by the way he was asking that he didn't want me to say yes. He had someone else in mind. And so he declined it. But he was going to get something crazy like 10% of the gross. It was something insane. Someone goes, I calculated it for you. But Russell Crowe turned it down because he knew Peter Jackson did not want him to play Aragorn.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's actually dive into this chapter. There's so much to talk about, so much to uncover here. It's an odd chapter, which means that I have the summary. Are you ready, Phil?
Let's hear it.
Bilbo finds himself alone deep in the mountain. While getting to his feet, he comes across a golden ring, which he slips into his pocket. As he looks for a way out of the darkness of the mountain, he comes across an underground lake. Here he meets a slimy creature named Gollum, who has lived under the mountain for ages. The two strike up a game of riddles. If Bilbo wins, Gollum will show him the way out. But if Gollum wins, he will eat Bilbo. The game ends surprisingly, with Bilbo asking Gollum what is in his pocket. Gollum is unable to answer and loses the game. Gollum realizes that Bilbo must have his own precious ring and chases after him. Providentially, the ring slips onto Bilbo's finger, making him invisible. He then secretly follows Gollum out of the cave and onto the other side of the Misty Mountains.
This was a really fun chapter to read. I wrote it. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think anyone will believe that? I read it for the third time in preparation for this. In the car on the drive up, because my wife and I were out of town with our son, and everyone was asleep. My dog was asleep in the back. My son was asleep, and this chapter just keeps on going. And I thought,
it is a long chapter.
I'm almost done, and I still had 15 minutes left, and it's about 29, 30 pages in a standard paperback size. But it was so fun to read, and there are details that I didn't quite fully grasp that I now am excited to talk about, in particular with the ring.
Well, this is actually a great segue because I actually don't know if you know this or not. This chapter used to be much shorter. Do you know that Tolkien actually rewrote? He did a George Lucas, and he went back 20 years later and did a special edition of this chapter.
Really? How much longer did it make it?
He made it considerably longer. So the original book comes out obviously in 1937, and Tolkien starts in I think the 40s, so not too long after that. Once he's writing the new Hobbit, as the Inklings called it, he comes up with this idea, or at least incorporates an already existing idea, that the ring that Bilbo found is actually going to be a ring of power, and it's going to actually be this one ring of Sauron's, right? Well, that actually was a problem, because in the original text, which is not easy to find, you can pretty much only find it in the history of The Hobbit, with some of the manuscripts, which we've talked about, and we've shared links for that before, and then portions of it you can also find in the annotated Hobbit. But in the original 1937 text, Gollum gives Bilbo the ring as a reward for winning the contest. The original bet, when the book was published, and for its first about 14 years of publication, was that if Bilbo wins the ring contest, Gollum gives him a present, and that present is a ring.
Which doesn't work at all.
Which is a big problem. If this is going to be the one ring that ensnares all who own it. And so we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more later in the chapter. But originally, what makes the chapter so long is that after Gollum goes back to the island, we know, and the narrator knows, he's really going back there to get his ring so he can slip it on his finger and kill Bilbo, right? But in the original text, he goes back, looks for his ring. He doesn't find it because Bilbo does have it in his pocket. And he comes back and apologizes to Bilbo for not having it. And he was like, well, since I don't have anything to give you, can I just show you the way out? And that's the end of the chapter.
Wow.
That
would be so different.
Very, very different.
I was about to ask you before you told me that story. Do you think it's okay to keep changing things in a story once it's been published? I would say yes, absolutely. If that's going to be the thing that you're going to change.
And we'll certainly unpack this as we get further into this episode, because Tolkien actually even went back in the 60s and began rewriting the entirety of The Hobbit to match the tone of The Lord of the Rings. Now, he actually abandoned it after about, I think it's 3 chapters. I have not read this yet. I actually want us to read through some of it together, which would be really fun, maybe in a Dancing Lawn episode. He said, and many people reading it with him that he was sharing the manuscript with, were like, it's just not The Hobbit anymore. It doesn't, he tried to make it much, he took out all the anachronistic terms, he changed the tone, there's no more asides to the reader and all those things. And even he himself was like, it's not The Hobbit anymore. Yeah, the tone's going to feel a little bit of a shift from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings, but he ended up being okay with that. But he really did rewrite this chapter, and then that's what we have published here. And here's what's interesting, and I went back and checked it this past week. In the introduction to The Lord of the Rings, there's I think 4 parts. The first one's the concerning hobbits. One's on the rings of power. One of the little kind of sections before you open up chapter 1 of Fellowship is Tolkien says, hey, because this is from 1954 when it's published, hey, if you've heard a different version of Bilbo's story than what you're about to hear in chapter 2, Shadows of the Past, where Gandalf tells Frodo, hey, this ring that Bilbo found is the one ring, and it gives you the whole backstory of Gollum, blah, blah, blah. He's like, if you've heard a different story, that's because Bilbo felt kind of guilty about the way he won the contest. So when he got back to the Shire, he actually lied to everyone and said that Gollum wanted to do this. And so he didn't want it. He actually didn't tell the right story, but I've actually been able to uncover what really happened, which is that Gollum was attempting to kill him. So it's super interesting.
Wild.
Yeah. I think what needs to happen now, if they really want to make money, they should talk to me. The Tolkien State, if they're ever, needing a little bit of extra funds.
Our number's at the end of the episode.
You
can leave us a voicemail.
Give
we'll
me
get
a
back
call.
To you.
I'll help you out. They should release the original Hobbit and then from now on, there should be the Hobbit Special Edition, and they just slap it on there. And that one has AI art on the front, the Special Edition one, and the old one has some of the old paintings and stuff like that.
That's
and then
funny.
you can get the new good stuff.
We're gonna release the original version, but it's gonna not be remastered. It's gonna be grainy and have a bunch of flecks in it.
So isn't that interesting though? I think a lot of people are not familiar with that.
Yeah, I feel like if you were to do that today, it would have a different impact. But because it was so long ago, and I think the version that is popular, the version that most people know, is that updated version.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, and they've also buried it so successfully that.
Well, and because The Hobbit, and this is what we're attempting to do this season on the show, is read The Hobbit as its own work. Yeah, there's going to be some talk of The Lord of the Rings, especially in this particular chapter, but I think for most people, The Hobbit has become kind of viewed through the lens of the much more famous work now, The Lord of the Rings, so that people are only familiar with this. And I mean, we're now more than 75 years after the fact, so it's not like there's a ton of first editions just floating around. But at this point, that first go of the chapter is mostly forgotten and left to these kind of more historical versions, these manuscripts you can read through, but you can't. I don't know that you can walk into Barnes & Noble and find the history of The Hobbit on the bookshelves there. You should be able to. It's a great book, but I don't know that it actually is sold by them and stuff. And so you have to go looking for this kind of original version of the chapter, which I will read some of later when we get there.
I think what people crave is a really good, well-constructed story. And so the changes don't matter as much if that's the end result that we get.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned before, the George Lucas example is some of the stuff kind of changes a character, like the Han shot first being re-edited and
Jabba the Hutt being thrown in there randomly in A New Hope.
Yeah. And it just, I
the
think
Jedi Rocks music video in Jabba's palace.
yeah, I think it is so wise to not mess with the stuff from before most of the time. But if anyone could pull it off, it would be Tolkien.
Well, also the difference, my one Star Wars comment, is that instead of making the prequels to line up with the work that comes next, he made the older works line up with the newer work, which is a little bit odd. But that's neither here nor there. Let's actually go into this dark cavern with Bilbo. He kind of comes to after having fallen a decent amount. And this is actually where right in the very second chapter, second paragraph, he finds the ring. He puts it in his pocket, and Tolkien tells us it's the turning point in his career.
But he did not know it.
Yeah, didn't know it at all. And that's not even hey, he's found the one ring. This works just within the context of this particular book, right? This is legitimately a turning point in Bilbo's story. He's going to use this ring to escape. And the next chapter, he's going to impress the dwarves when he takes it off and shows that he's kind of was able to slip past their watch guard, right? And he begins to show them, hey, I'm actually valuable on this journey. It's a big deal for him. So Bilbo has now found the One Ring, which is both the most important plot device in this book and in the next book, The Lord of the Rings, obviously, right?
And which is broken up into 6 books.
6 books in 3 volumes. That makes a lot of sense, right? Everybody understands what we're talking about right now?
Wait, do it 4 books, 7 volumes.
Well, so there's a lot of discussion about where Tolkien gets the idea for a Ring of Power, and we've spent the last few seasons talking a decent amount about the way in which old stories and books influenced a lot of our modern writers like Tolkien and Lewis and MacDonald. And so I actually thought it'd be really fun for us. We spent 2 seasons ago, we talked a bit about Plato's Republic, and we talked about On the Reading of Old Books. And one of the most famous and earliest stories of a magic ring comes from Plato's Republic. There's a part in Book 2 where Glaucon, one of the characters, tells this story about a man who, like a chasm opens up in this side of this mountainside. And so he goes down into the mountain and he finds this withered corpse. And he takes from the corpse, this gross looking body, he takes a ring that will actually make him invisible. He then uses his invisibility, or he's corrupted, we might say, by this ring to then seduce the queen and with her help murder the king, and then he himself becomes the new king of the kingdom. So a man goes down deep into a mountain, finds a ring that makes him invisible, and then is corrupted by it to do bad things. Now, that's not completely the story of Bilbo at all, but you can clearly see some of what's happening there. And the reason, if you're like, wait, I thought Plato's Republic is about, is a work of philosophy. Mm-hmm. What's that story to do with it? I actually thought it might be great for you to read kind of 3 short paragraphs on what Plato's trying to do, because I think it'll actually help us get a better understanding of what Tolkien might be doing here, particularly in The Hobbit, even with a object, the ring, that isn't technically the One Ring yet. Right?
So this is 3 paragraphs from Plato's Republic, Book 2. Suppose that there were 2 such magic rings, and the just put on one of them, and the unjust the other. No man can be imagined to be of such an iron nature that he would stand fast in justice. No man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, or go into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, or kill or release from prison whom he would, and in all respects be like a god among men. Then the actions of the just would be as the actions of the unjust. They would both come at last to the same point. And this we may truly affirm to be the great proof that a man is just, not willingly, or because he thinks the justice is any good to him individually, but of necessity. For wherever anyone thinks that he can safely be unjust, there he is unjust. For all men believe in their hearts that injustice is far more profitable to the individual than justice, and he who argues as I have been supposing will say that they are right. If you could imagine anyone obtaining this power of becoming invisible, and never doing anything wrong or touching what was another's, he would be thought by the lookers-on to be a most wretched idiot, although they would praise him to one another's faces and keep up appearances with one another from a fear that they too might suffer injustice.
So we have a story that sounds a little bit like how Bilbo finds this ring, and then we get what Glaucon has to say here. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because when we get to the end of this chapter and Bilbo decides not to kill Gollum and to have pity on him, I think what we just read from the Republic is going to help us understand why Tolkien has this moment of pity. Because, and here's the important thing, that moment of pity exists before he's written The Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a discussion later on in The Lord of the Rings where Gandalf says that we don't really know what Gollum has to offer to this whole story, because Frodo says, oh, it was such a pity that Bilbo didn't kill Gollum. Like, oh, I wish he had killed him, because Gollum gave up the name of Shire and Baggins to the enemy in Mordor. And Gandalf corrects him. It's like, actually, that we don't know. It might have been, it was actually pity that stayed his hand. And so we know, spoiler alert, maybe skip ahead 30 seconds if you haven't read Lord of the Rings, that it is Gollum who will actually be part of the destruction of this ring that frees Middle-earth from Sauron's rule. But Tolkien writes that moment where Gollum isn't killed by Bilbo. That's in the original 1937 text. Mm-hmm. It's not like he has, it's this moment of pity that then will lead to the overthrow of all evil in Middle-earth. It's like, no, that's got to have something to do with this particular thing. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I know we're going a little bit out of order, but I think what we just heard Glaucon say about the just and the unjust with this power will be what helps us understand why Tolkien includes that scene. But we haven't even met Gollum yet, so we probably should get to what happens next. So Bilbo finds the ring. That's all that's happened so far in the chapter. And what happens next?
He gets into a game of riddles. Or do you want to skip that far?
Yeah, we can. So he walks down.
It happens pretty quickly.
He walks down the path. He stumbles into some water, and then this slimy creature comes up.
And Gollum has played riddle games before. He's played games before, but it was a really long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also bored, and he's not hungry, and that's the key. If he was hungry, this story would be over already.
That's right.
But because he's not hungry and because he's bored, I think he then chooses to engage with Bilbo, and they have this riddle game. And there's also this history around this riddle game. It's a sacred thing.
Oh, yes.
But
it's from antiquity.
From antiquity. Gollum is also so wretched that it doesn't have quite the same hold on him.
Not necessarily, no.
Yeah.
We should read that first introduction of Gollum, right? When him and Bilbo first meet. Do you want to read it? Do you want me to read it?
Let's hear you read it. I just read an exhausting 3 paragraphs of Plato's Republic.
So here we go. This is when Gollum first comes up. He's come out of his boat. He's left his island. He's in his boat. Excuse me. He's gotten into his boat and left his island. And then he comes up. Suddenly, up came Gollum and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast, at least a tasty morsel it makes us. Gollum!" And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself through never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. "I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know if only I can get away." "What's he got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin." "Shh," said Gollum, and became quite polite. "Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps it does it?" He was anxious to appear friendly at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of.
I really don't mind if you do that voice. I just wish you would keep your shirt on.
You didn't like that? We haven't said this. I'm in full Gollum cosplay right now.
Can we turn the lights back on? I will say, if maybe this should be one of our Patreon rewards. There's nothing like watching the 14-hour extended version of The Lord of the Rings in 4D with Daniel. With Daniel doing the voices and crouching next to you on the couch.
We're going to watch, actually at this point, by the time this episode airs, we have watched An Unexpected Journey and done the commentary. So if you want to listen to almost 3 hours of us talking about a movie which neither of us particularly like,
you know what?
Check it out for $2.
Have you seen the behind the scenes of The Dragon, the motion capture?
Mm-hmm. I have.
That's something I'm looking forward to seeing again.
That'll be fun, yeah.
Because I do think that was a pretty amazing performance from Sherlock and Watson.
Well, so this game of riddles ensues, and I learned something over the past week as I was preparing for this episode, which I did not know. I've always wondered, maybe our listeners might have felt this way, maybe they haven't. I've always wondered, like, riddles kind of weird. It's just like a weird thing to put into here. But as I was reading through Richard Anderson's annotated Hobbit and in Rate Lift's The History of the Hobbit, I found out, which shouldn't surprise anyone listening to this podcast and should not and didn't surprise me once I read it, is that, the idea of a riddle game goes back to a lot of ancient stories. In fact, very famously occurs in 2 Norse myths. And I wanted to read just a little bit from Richard Anderson here. And you had to read Plato, but I have to read the name of these Nordic gods.
Yes, good luck.
and things. So I just want to read this real quick because I think if you're like me and you're just wondering why do they play riddles? Like that just feels like a weird thing. Well, it's Tolkien pulling on old stories. Listen to what Anderson says. The 2 greatest riddle contests in Old Norse literature both end on the same sort of questionable non-riddle that this game ends in. In the Vafthrudismal, the Lay of Vafthrundir, and the Elder Ada, when Odin hears of the great wisdom of one of the giants, he resolves to match his own lore against the giants. Disguised, Odin wins the contest by asking the question, what did Odin whisper in the ear of his son before Balder was carried to the pyre? Now, only Odin could know this answer, and thus his true identity is revealed. In the saga of King Heidrek the Wise, another riddle contest involves Odin in disguise, and the contest ends with the same exact kind of question. So that's why we have a game of riddles. That helped me make a little bit more sense of why this occurs.
And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it also explains why it ended the way it did.
Exactly.
And I keep finding out that people aren't making stuff up out of nowhere. They're very influenced by the thing that came before them. And I'm so curious, where did these... Because these stories are so old that we're not going to know who came up with which...
Yeah, they were just passed down orally before they were written down.
They're passed down. But it's really fun to find out who influenced who and to trace that backward. Part of why we did George MacDonald was to see who's influencing Lewis. And then this is someone who Lewis and Tolkien are influencing each other, but not in a way that we might see in published works.
Yeah, that's going to be really fun for our Enchanted Epistle at the end of this episode because it talks about influences. It's a letter from Lewis about Tolkien's influences.
Excellent.
So then we get the actual game of riddles. We're not going to read all of them, but maybe we'll read some of them. Do you have a favorite riddle that you want to read? Or can I even ask you if there's one that you thought was the easiest or maybe the hardest? I know you've read the book many times.
I've read it many times, and riddles are very difficult for me, especially ones that are written in such flowery language as this. But I really enjoy the part that stands out to me is when Bilbo says half a moment. It's just he's buying himself time, but this entire game you feel this time pressure.
Yes.
It's just 2 of them. There are no commercial breaks. You don't have to fit it within a certain time, but there's this understood time pressure from both sides. Yeah, you can have a little bit more time, but come on, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's hear your answer. You lost the game. And there's also the factor of either one of them could die. And Gollum doesn't necessarily know that, but Bilbo is armed.
That's right. Yeah, he is.
And it would probably be a fair fight if they were both visible. It's just interesting that there's this pressure and it's getting more and more, but then there's also this respect for the rules until there's no respect for the rules.
So pick out.
My favorite one is the first they champ, then they stamp, then they stand.
Why don't you read that whole one for us?
30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still.
And we get the wonderful response.
This is from Bilbo to Gollum.
Yes. Gollum says, chestnuts, chestnuts, teeth, my precious. But really has only 6.
I just love that character development there where you find out how many teeth he has.
What's really cool about the annotated Hobbit is that Richard Anderson goes into really in depth into where a lot of these riddles come from. So believe it or not, there is this riddle you just read actually comes from a book of nursery rhymes. Listen to this. 30 white horses upon a red hill. Now they tramp, now they champ, now they stand still. So for a lot of
Change one
things,
letter.
he is pulling from pre-existing ones, but not all of them. He's making up some of them. Some are coming from other places. Some he's rewriting a little bit. He's maybe messing around with some of the words. But for a lot of these, again, he's pulling from mostly pre-existing things.
Yeah. Which lends this, it makes it feel like there is this history in this world because he's pulling from stuff that sounds a little bit familiar to us. We've probably heard some kind of riddle like this, but it's not familiar enough that we can recite the whole thing. It's just a little bit further removed in that way.
Yeah.
It also helps, and these aren't necessarily from a non-English language, but to me it helps when you're hearing fairy tales from another culture that you didn't necessarily have those same fairy tales, where it feels old, it's weird enough and removed enough, but it also isn't something that you necessarily grew up with.
Did you also know what the word chestnuts mean? Does that always felt weird to you?
I thought that was the answer to the riddle.
That's what he's saying. It's like the answer.
On the first two readings, I fell for it both times. I thought he was saying that there are chestnuts, and I thought maybe that was a type of horse, and that's why they were white horses.
No, it actually is kind of an old slang term. I looked it up because it was bothering me too. And it's an old kind of slang for like a well-known joke. So like, why did the chicken cross the road is like a chestnut.
It's a chestnut.
Right, because it's like, oh, we all, like everybody knows that one, you know? So I kind of love that Gollum has that, and it actually does bring some humanity to him. Well, he's not human, but you know, like it brings some of, you know, let's, for lack of a better word, let's say humanity to him, because it helps remind us of, wait, this slimy kind of decrepit creature used to be something else. We get that too when he gets the riddle about it's one of my favorite ones, so I'll go ahead and actually read it. We get it just a little bit later on when Bilbo says this: a box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. This one is really hard. Actually, let me read a little bit about what the narrator says. This Bilbo thought a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words, but it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some while, Bilbo became impatient. "Well, what is it?" he said. "The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you're making."
Give us a chance, Luke, give us a chance, my precious.
"Well," said Bilbo, after giving him a long chance, "what about your guess?" But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under the riverbank, teaching his grandmother to suck
Eggs!
he hissed.
Eggs it is.
And then he immediately asks another one. This happens for both sides. They're about to not get it, and then something about either their history or something that happens with a fish at one point causes them to remember, and it keeps the game going. But it gives it this just in the nick of time by a wire, like just at the last second. It goes through, and it keeps the suspense the entire time.
Well, let's talk about that fish one, right? Because that is so important to one of these themes that's continued throughout the book, which is what is Bilbo's luck. Do you want to actually read that part where the fish jumps out? There's like one or two sentences there.
Yeah, so the Hobbit is shivering. He says, "Half a moment. I gave you a good chance just now." And Gollum says, "It must make haste." "Haste," said Gollum.
Come on, you don't want to do it? Look.
I'm getting psyched up.
The listeners.
Hold on.
The listeners want to hear your Gollum voice.
It's not fair because yours is so good. Let me get on all fours. Let me get crouched. "It must make haste, haste," said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. "Ugh," he said, "it is cold and clammy." And so he guessed. "Fish! Fish!" he cried. "It is fish." Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as ever he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think.
Yeah. So you have that, which is
No.
really great luck. And the next Gollum riddle is the time riddle. And we're told that Bilbo wants to shout out, "Give me some time, give me more time." But all that comes out are the two words, time and time. And the very next sentence after that, Bilbo was saved by pure luck. And so for the final two, and honestly, we could say the final three kind of riddles, well, the last two of Gollum's, and then the last thing that Bilbo says, it is pure dumb luck, or at least it appears to be, that Bilbo was saved, because he gets lucky with the fish. He gets lucky by just saying, "I need more time," but time is actually the answer. And then the very next thing is when he asks himself, "What do I have in my pocket?" And I want to point this out because I think one of this ideas of Bilbo's luck, and Tolkien does use that word. I really think, and I use this word in the summary, I really think Tolkien wants us to ask, what is happening through what we would maybe call here in Middle-earth divine providence? Like, what is Eru Ilúvatar, kind of the creator, the lord over all of this world, actually doing here? Like, what is going on that this all just so happens? Like, there's too many. We've talked before about when we did The Horse and His Boy, and I talked about some of the ways in which it reminded me of the book of Esther.
Mm-hmm. It just so happens.
It just so happens.
No mention of God the entire book, but it just so happens.
It just so happens that this happens, and this happens, and this happens. Well, we've got that here, where it just so happens that Bilbo found this ring, right? And you remember at the beginning of this chapter, Bilbo isn't really close to where Gollum lives. Remember, he walks down and down and goes by a bunch of passages. It's not like Gollum lost it right next to his island. He lost it a long way off. So somehow it was able to escape from him. Bilbo then gets lucky multiple times here. And then even just in a moment, when Gollum goes to eat him, or at least chase after him, it slips onto his finger without him meaning for it to.
That's the one that really gets me. And it almost feels like the ring's a little bit in control.
Yeah, it's the next. Keep going, though. You keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That was it. There's so many coincidences, but it doesn't feel contrived.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the masterstroke of Tolkien's work, is that, of course, he's putting all these things together, and they do just so happen to work out. But it gives it this sense of there's something else at play at the same time.
Well, I think one of the, and I don't have an answer at all to this, just what I've been thinking about is, so maybe Bilbo's luck is some kind of divine providence in a way, but we have to also hold that up against the fact that the ring very much is a character here. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Tolkien even writes using, at one point, and I don't have it right in front of me, but he uses it as a subjective pronoun to do something. Like, it slipped onto his finger, I think is maybe the sentence I'm thinking of. It slipped onto his finger. Not he slipped it on, it slipped on. Like, the subject doing the actual verb is the ring, right? And so even if you have Eru Ilúvatar, who is good, again, I know that's not technically in this book because we don't have that, right? But if you have some, maybe whatever, some kind of, whether it be luck or providence or God's will, whatever you want to call it, right, is happening for the good of things. At the same time, there is the ring, which is attempting to, like, get away. In fact, one of the things I really, really love, and I don't remember if this line is actually in The Lord of the Rings, is in the prologue to The Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, is Galadriel in that prologue says the ring abandoned Gollum. Mm-hmm. And I do think there is a line where Gandalf says in the books, something along the lines of, like, it's always trying to seek its match. It's always trying to return to Sauron, right? And so because of that, the ring is like it can't move on its own. Obviously, it's not like moving, but it does. It has a mind of its own, and that it has its own will is maybe a better way of thinking of it. Yeah. And so, like, is it kind of these two competing things? Is there some kind of dualism here, where you have this good luck, but you also have this kind of evil ring, also trying to make its own way? I don't know. It's just interesting to think about it like that.
Yeah. And also, it's interesting because you've now shared that there are edits and big changes made from when this was first published. But when I was reading this afternoon, and before you said that, I thought, okay, this is late 1930s. This is not the Lord of the Rings. Some of this stuff changed, but also, am I misremembering things from the book because I've seen at least the first movie more recently?
Yeah.
Because I read the book maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I rewatched, I think, just the first movie 2 years ago.
Sure.
But when he puts on the ring, it doesn't seem to make him nauseous. It doesn't seem to make him see Sauron. There are all these things that don't happen that do happen to Bilbo.
You mean
Not
Frodo?
Frodo. Happened to Frodo.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how much of that is you got to show stuff differently. How much of it is that actually was in the book. I just don't remember. How much of it was for the Hobbit. He's not going to go into all that. It's just you slip the ring on and off, and it's not that big a deal. Or is there something that changes from when Bilbo has it to when Frodo has it?
Well, and that's a question of, I wonder how chapter 6 and through the rest of the book would have changed had Tolkien actually rewritten the entirety of the book. Because even with this chapter having been rewritten, it does, and there's kind of other ways you can try to explain it in the canon of the Legendarium, but it is a little weird that how much it slips on and off and on and off, and it doesn't react the same way. And there's different ways that it's later kind of explained, but it still is like they're all like post hoc explanations for it. Like, it's all right, let's come up with an explanation to make this thing work because it doesn't quite work. And I think it's why, as much as we keep saying, ad nauseum, that we're not going to look a ton at the Lord of the Rings as we read this book, you can't help but do it with this chapter because Tolkien is writing this chapter with the Lord of the Rings in mind.
Yeah.
I actually, though, before we continue on, we should talk about what actually happens with that final joke and what goes on, and then I'll maybe read some of the original text from the original 1937 version. But tell me about first, before we do that, this last kind of unfair riddle that occurs.
Yeah, for the first time, I really paid attention to the line that comes before where they explain that Bilbo, he actually forgot what was in his pocket. And he says it out loud. And it's only when Gollum reacts and starts trying to figure out what it is, and Bilbo sees that he's stumped, that he goes along with it and says that he has to answer because that is the thing. And it is this kind of, it's not fair. It's not a real riddle. How would he be able to figure out what's in his pocket? But he also does feel like he gets kind of close. He guesses hands. Bilbo had just taken his hands out. He guesses knife. He did have a knife, but it wasn't there. And I think he would have had to tell the truth, and he would have lost. But it just so happens that it's this ring. And what's really interesting is Gollum doesn't guess it, even though he's missing it. And knowing what we know about the ring, it does feel like he would be missing it a little more strongly.
But he doesn't. You're right. He doesn't guess it. And so he loses the riddle contest. He guesses even two. So what is it again? He guesses hands. That's wrong. Knife is wrong. And string and nothing at the same time.
String or nothing. Yeah.
Kind of cheats there a little bit at the end. But then again, I guess Bilbo's kind of cheating too. In fact, I want to read from the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, that same prologue where I mentioned that Tolkien says, hey, Bilbo kind of changed a little bit of his own story to make it work. Well, in that same prologue, he also talks about the end of this riddle game. Listen to this. He says, the authorities, it is true, differ whether this last question was a mere question and not a riddle, according to the strict rules of the game. But they all agree that, after accepting it and trying to guess the answer, Gollum was bound by his promise.
Ah, yeah.
So it's like if he hadn't guessed, he might have been able to get away, like and say, hey, that's not fair.
Yeah.
But by attempting to guess, he is accepting the rules of the game.
Yeah.
Well, before we actually go on to what happens, because this right here, so he guesses incorrectly. Bilbo says, you have to show me, well, I won the contest. He then kind of points his sword at Gollum because he's not sure if Gollum's going to keep up his end of the bargain. Well, that is where Tolkien does his most extensive rewrites of the chapter. It's from that point on that he does most of the rewriting. There have been a couple of words or phrases or a sentence or two here or there, but it's here that he pretty much rewrote almost the rest of the chapter until Bilbo gets kind of to the goblin's door.
That's interesting because when I read this part, I thought this is where it should end. This is where the chapter should end.
Mm-hmm.
He gets it wrong. Now we're gonna move on to the next stage, but this does feel like an extended episode.
That's what's happening here. Well, let me actually read you a little bit of this. So here's from 1937. But funnily enough, Bilbo need not have been alarmed. For one thing, Gollum had learned long, long ago was never, never to cheat at the riddle game, which is a sacred one and of immense antiquity. Also, there was the sword. He simply sat and whispered. What about the present? Asked Bilbo. Not that he cared very much, still he felt that he had won it pretty fairly and in very difficult circumstances, too.
Must we give it the thing, Precious? Yes, we must, yes. We must fetch it, Precious, and give it the present we promised.
And so Gollum paddled back to his boat, and Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him, but he had not. The Hobbit was just thinking of going back up the passage, having had quite enough of Gollum in the dark water's edge, when he heard him wailing and squeaking away in the gloom. He was on his island, of which, of course, Bilbo knew nothing, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain, and turning out his pockets.
Where is it? Where is it?
Bilbo heard him squeaking.
Lost, my precious, lost. Blesses and splashes. We haven't the present we promised, and we haven't even got it for ourselves.
Bilbo turned round and waited, wondering what it could be that the creature was making such a fuss about. This proved very fortunate afterwards, for Gollum came back and made a tremendous spluttering and whispering and croaking, and in the end Bilbo gathered that Gollum had had a ring, a wonderful, beautiful ring, a ring that he had been given for a birthday present ages and ages before in old days when such rings were less uncommon. Sometimes he had it in his pocket. Usually he kept it in a little hole in the rock on his island. Sometimes he wore it when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish and crept along dark passages looking for stray goblins. Then he might venture even into places where the torches were lit and made his eyes blink and smart. But he would be safe. Oh, yes, very nearly safe. For if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that was a faint and shaky sort of shadow. I don't know how many times Gollum begged Bilbo's pardon. He kept on saying,
We are sorry. We didn't mean to cheat. We meant to give it our only present if it won the competition.
He even offered to catch Bilbo some nice juicy fish to eat as a consolation. Bilbo shuddered at the thought of it. No, thank you, he said as politely as he could. So it goes on from there. I won't read all of it. You can actually find it in things like the History of the Hobbit. But Gollum literally apologizes for not giving him the ring. Like
it would not have worked.
You can't do that. Yeah, you have to rewrite it. Yeah. Tolkien's 100% right. The Lord of the Rings falls apart if that actually does occur.
Yeah.
I love even offers him fishing. I'm so sorry about this. I promised I would do it. I feel terrible.
It just feels like a completely different story.
Yeah.
And I'm always, whenever I read something like that or hear something like that, I think, should we be able to know that?
Oh, like, should we have those manuscripts?
Yeah.
No, it's so fun that we do.
I'm glad that we do, but it just,
Well, it's not even a manuscript. It's literally like if you have an original edition of this book, you would have that.
right.
It was published.
Yeah.
But that's actually let's go back. So that is so fun. We spent it's funny. I think we spent just as much of this episode talking about what's not in the book as what's actually in the book. What actually does happen when Bilbo points out his sword and Gollum says, "I need to go return to my island"?
Gollum goes back, looks for the ring, doesn't find it, and then wails, and then goes to attack Bilbo. Bilbo, does he trip and then put on the ring? Or does he put on the ring and then trip?
He puts on the ring first, and then when he trips, before he can do anything, he falls on top of his sword, not like it doesn't impale him.
That part could have been rewritten.
Yeah. like Tolkien, I think you missed a thing there. But but which makes sense though, because it had still been shining just a little bit, I believe, because there's still some God. It's not shining brightly. Mm-hmm. So I guess he has to fall on it, or else wouldn't. Wait, I'm actually not sure. How does this invisibility work? Does everything you are wearing turn invisible too? It has to.
Yes.
We know that.
So
but what about?
I have a theory about this.
Okay.
I think that it works by scattering the light around it, and whatever's coming in or whatever's behind it is going to be passed through on the other side, which is why the shadow part still works. Because it's still blocking really powerful beams of light. And I think because Gollum's eyes are so good, it's not that he can see, but he might be able to detect a shimmer or something.
But when Bilbo holds his sword, it makes sense. But when Bilbo holds his sword, is the sword invisible or is it floating?
When he's first holding it at Gollum, he doesn't have the ring on.
No, I'm just in general. Like I'm saying, just how does later on in this book, if he's invisible, would you just see a floating sword?
I
or
think
is it
as
invisible?
long as he is completely holding it, I think it would.
So if he touches a person, does that make them invisible? No.
It's too much mess.
Because I was trying to think of like other ways this works. So Sue Storm in the comic books. What?
Which one? Jessica Alba?
No. I said in the comic books.
Kate Mara or Vanessa Kirby?
No. Oh, I've literally only seen the ones from the 2000s. I've never seen any of the new ones.
And I only saw the first one.
Well,
but she's invisible, so it doesn't.
She wasn't in. I didn't know who she was.
By the way, Burger King 1998 had an Invisible Woman toy. And I was so excited about getting that one. My mom even said, like, she kind of like winked at the guy. I was like, "Can you put the Invisible One?"
Like,
I know that one's only on Tuesdays, but it's Wednesday. But like, he really wants this one, and I finally got it. But then I lost it. Man, every adult had a joke about how I lost my Invisible Woman toy.
Well, remember in the original comics, she has to wear her like spacesuit, or they have to make her a special suit that also turns invisible.
That also was exposed because it
had to also been exposed to the gamma rays.
Powers
That's Hulk. What rays did they expose? I don't remember.
Space rays.
Space rays. That's not it, but let's go for it. But this is not that. This is a fully article clothes also are invisible too. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so like
playing a little loose and fast with the physics of Middle Earth here, but I'm all right.
A cloak would cover everything, so as long as the knife was underneath that. But I just feel like it's small enough and it's a part of it. But the fact that he falls on top of it and then Gollum doesn't see him, that is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But in the movies, what do we see anything being held up?
I don't know, but also the movies they're not canonical to what's in the books. Yeah. But I really don't remember. I really can't remember.
I really think it has to be anything small.
If he's holding
any inanimate object that you are holding.
Do you think that like Sauron's creating the One Ring and he's like, all right, I got to make the rules for this thing? Or is it just, this is just like this just, did he plan When he pours into it all of his malice and greed and envy, all these things that Sauron's pouring into the ring as he's creating it, and at Mount Doom, is he also being like, and I want it to let this amount of weight also be invisible too?
This is what Rings of Power season 4.
This is why we stopped watching it, because they actually probably would try to answer that show so bad.
It's just watching a. I'm not saying it's bad. You're the one who doesn't like it.
Did you watch the second
I haven't
season?
seen. Have you seen the second season?
No, you didn't watch it because you thought the first season was bad.
No, I haven't watched it because I don't have Prime.
But you didn't like it enough to go get Prime.
Well,
steal my
Part
password.
of the excitement with the first one was people kept inviting me over. I had people competing to invite me over early.
But as each episode went on, nobody
invited me to season 2.
Nobody watched it. I'm sure some of our listeners did, but
probably 100 million people watched it, but I didn't have. There wasn't the same excitement in this friend group.
yeah.
And your TV's up so high now, and I just
You really are bothered by the fact that I don't watch it that much anyway, so just there. You watch all your stuff on a laptop. So you're going to tell me that my TV's hanging up too high?
I watch it on a very high resolution screen right in front of my face.
All right, so
we both have neck pain, just different kinds of neck pain.
that's right.
I think that season 4 is going to be all product focus groups. So for this kind of ring, are you picturing when you hear Ring of Power and it turns you invisible? What are you picturing as invisible? Describe what you see when you see something invisible.
Well, all right. So back to the story. Bilbo is invisible. Gollum he kind of walks over him. And Bilbo realizes, I clearly can't be seen because Gollum would have seen me. He can see very well in the dark. He's got the kind of like lighthouse eyes kind of peering out. Mm-hmm. And as he does this, he realizes Gollum assumes that Bilbo has run off, right? And Gollum it's a little unclear because it's hard to understand what Gollum is really thinking when he's having conversations with himself. But Gollum seems to assume that Bilbo has put the ring on. He knows Bilbo certainly has the ring, and he assumes he's probably put the ring on, but he doesn't really know the way out. So I'll go close to the door, and I'll wait for him there, and I'll try to catch him. Mm-hmm. And that's where this incredible inflection point occurs, where Bilbo begins to see the kind of literal light at the end of the tunnel, but Gollum is clearly in his way. Here is what Tolkien writes. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away, out of this horrible darkness, while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him or tried to yet, and he was miserable, alone, lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless, unmarked days without light or hope of betterment, hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in the flash of a second. He trembled. And then quite suddenly, in another flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leaped. So that moment that we just read is part of the revision. In the original 1937 edition, Gollum walks Bilbo right out the door. Pretty much. He walks him right up to it. But here, this moment occurs where Bilbo chooses not to kill Gollum. And now we know the context for that in the larger story of what's going on in Middle-earth is that this will eventually lead to the destruction of the ring. Not just because of what happens at Mount Doom, but Frodo and Sam don't get into Mordor without Gollum, right? They pretty much probably just die of starvation wandering around Immanuel. Like, they never make it past that, probably, because that's where he finds them and he leads them out.
Yeah.
A question I want us just to ponder is what does that do for Bilbo in this particular story? Here, just in The Hobbit. Yeah, there's the larger context, but I'm concerned about this book. What do we make of Bilbo's character here?
Shows that he has character.
Yeah.
And it makes him more complex than maybe some of the side characters, where it's a little easier. There's no dilemma. You just dispatch.
And I think I might have even incorrectly said this earlier, because when I originally thought, because there's a couple of other non-published manuscripts that we have not brought up, I actually thought that this scene had always been in the book. I might have even said that earlier, but it wasn't. The original version, the version of the story does not have that. It just has Bilbo escaping. But here, I think what it does for this character goes back to that portion of the Republic that you read closer to the beginning of the episode, which is that you have the just and the unjust man. And as we think about the corruption that the ring has, we know that, I mean, what does Glaucon say? But like, everyone gets corrupted by that. Like, nobody puts that ring on and isn't seduced to do something bad, probably, right? Everyone becomes a lot less just. And there's even there's kind of this line, and you read a little bit of it, and it goes on a little bit later in book 2 of the Republic. I think it's there that they kind of unpack this more, which is the idea that people might say, oh, like, that's really great that you didn't abuse it, but they actually are all kind of judging you for not doing it, right? They might, like, internally, they're like, why wouldn't you do that? 'Cause that's what I would do, kind of deal. And so this is, though, Bilbo at a place where he actually does kind of overcome the temptation for power, or the temptation to use this thing for evil, right? He has the ability to do this. The safest option ahead of him would be to kill Gollum and walk out.
Right.
And in fact, we are told that when he does leap, which is dangerous in and of itself because Gollum could have caught him, he only is a mere inches from crushing his skull on the ceiling of the cave. He can't see how tall it is, right? He almost kills himself doing this.
Yeah.
And so the character of Bilbo, this is maybe his most heroic moment in the book. He's going to do a lot more heroic things too. I think it might be this moment and maybe the stealing of the Arkenstone. Spoiler alert. They're the most heroic things, not because they're traditionally heroic, and that's not to downplay traditional heroism. Tolkien very much was writing in that kind of vein. But the fact that what Bilbo's doing here is incredibly virtuous. Like, he understands the situation so well. He knows, he actually sees Gollum and he has this compassion, but it's not this compassion and empathy that lacks courage either, because the courage is still there. He has all of these things together. He has to have courage
to make these choices
to do it, right? It's actually courageous to not kill here. And this is not Tolkien being some pacifist at all. That's not what he's doing here, right? But it is still courageous because he does spare the life, right? And there is that great line, I think it's in chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past in Fellowship, where Gandalf says, you know, like, and I'm going to butcher it right now, and everyone else is probably going to think of it correctly. But, you know, there are many people who deserve to live who die, and many people who die who deserve to live. Like, can you be the one who kind of deals out what is fair and what is right and what is just? And what makes this scene, I think, so pivotal to Bilbo's character is he seems to act justly and rightly and virtuously, even though he has every excuse not to. Not just even like kind of morally, because you could argue he has to do it to escape, he has to do this, blah, blah, blah. But also he could do it physically and get away with it. And we know that it's not that he's necessarily such a good-natured character he would never do that. He did kind of just cheat to win the riddle game. Again, not on purpose, but he certainly was not about to say, one, hey, I think I have your ring. Yeah. And two, I also, you're right, that wasn't a fair question. Let me ask a different one.
Yeah. After you guessed one of them wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such an important moment.
It is. And I think the key for me is that it's not in his interest at all to leave Gollum alone. It would be the safer option to take Gollum out and then move on. And he doesn't win the princess's hand in marriage. There's no other reward. It's just the two of them. And he's invisible. And I think that shows this true character in Bilbo, which is interesting because later on the ring does start to corrupt him. And then we see in Frodo kind of a more pure form of not letting that happen as much. But it, again, still happens. Like, we see that it does eventually start corrupting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's just about where the chapter ends. There's about one more scene left. Bilbo jumps over Gollum, eventually makes it to the door. There's a bunch of golems. There's a bunch of goblins who see them there. That we learn that the ring had slipped off of his finger. Mm-hmm. And it actually slips back onto his finger after they see him. He hides as goblins kind of try to go looking for them. And he's able to squeeze out of the door. His brass buttons pop off as he's squeezing out, trying to shimmy his belly past the rock. But he does eventually get out, and he has made it safely to the other side, the eastern side of the Misty Mountains. And that's the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we move on?
It is very difficult to not have read the book and be limited to one chapter at a time, which is what we did for 6 of the 7 Narnia books, and then you did the Horse and His Boy one. And then for this book, I'm currently on chapter 10 in my third reading of it, or in my second reading of it, because I'm reading ahead just for fun, but then I'm also in chapter 5 and I'm getting it all mixed up. And I thought, didn't he just suddenly appear in front of the group
in the next chapter
and surprise all of them? But
yeah, that's the next chapter.
That comes later. It's all mixed up in my head. And it doesn't help that you read 4 different revisions.
There's a little confusion. I feel like it's been really fun to do it, but I myself have been confused, because that's why I was like, wait a second, maybe this scene does happen in the original. I'm a little confused because I've read all these different versions of it recently. So
can you imagine being Frank Herbert trying to keep on? He only made one mistake in Dune, and he had one character, the Emperor's old at one point and young at another point. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the only mistake he made in a 700-page book.
That's impressive.
And that was in the 60s, and I also think there were some drugs involved.
The whole book is about a drug. That's what melange is.
That Frank Herbert
okay. I thought you were in the book. I was like, yeah, you kind of missed it if you didn't understand what melange is or how it's used. Oh my God,
is that what that is? Wait, so what's
it's not an allegory for anything. It just is like
it's just a drug.
Yeah.
But I'm impressed with anyone who did this before computers, and you could search and index things much more quickly. It's impressive.
Well, speaking of that next chapter is chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. And in that chapter, a company of wolves will attack the dwarves and Bilbo on the other side of the Misty Mountains. Well, our final thing we'll do today is we will read a letter in our Enchanted Epistles section here. And it is a letter to a Francis Anderson written by your friend and mine, Mr. Jack Lewis. He wrote this letter in September of 1963. He will die just 2 months after this is written, September the 23rd. And he passes away on November the 22nd of that year. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's kind of a longer letter. I'm actually just going to read the very first paragraph and the very last paragraph. Speaking of, I think you mentioned letters to Malcolm relatively recently. Was it in this episode? Maybe a different one. Yeah. Where you don't have, because it's a fictional kind of account between him and this person, you don't get the letters on the other side. Obviously, Francis Anderson is a real person, but we also don't have the letter that Francis sent. We only have Lewis's response. And it's one of those letters where like every paragraph is a response to something else he said. So it doesn't kind of flow. It's like, here's this answer and this answer. Yeah. But the first... Which
I will add, for letters to Malcolm, because it is fiction and he can do whatever he wants, Lewis does that masterfully. Mm-hmm. He hints just enough at something else, but he also restates it enough that you know what he's...
But the real letters don't do that, actually, because...
Right. But that's also what gave me a hint. I'm like, why is this so...
Yeah.
Why is it so good? Like, why?
Exactly,
It doesn't make any sense.
I should be a little confused if I'm just reading these letters. Yeah. Well, the first and last paragraph, though, do pertain to today's episode. All right, to Mr. Anderson. I don't think Tolkien influenced me, and I am certain I didn't influence him. That is, didn't influence what he wrote. My continual encouragement, carried to the point of nagging, influenced him very much to write at all with the gravity and at that length. In other words, I acted as a midwife, not as a father. The similarities between his work and mine are due, I think, to nature temperament, to common resource, and to common resources. We are both soaked in Norse mythology, George MacDonald's fairy tales, Homer, Beowulf, and medieval romance. And of course, we are both Christians, he and RC. And then, so I just want to read that first because we were talking about his influences. And I think what's interesting is I also would say Tolkien and Lewis had a lot of influence on one another. I've said it on this show many times before. Interesting to hear Jack himself say, we didn't influence each other. I understand the way he's saying it here. I'm not going to argue with the own man in his own writing. Yeah. But he's like, we would encouragement, at least for Tolkien, is more of how he would put it. I like that metaphor of like more of a midwife and less of a father.
Yeah.
And again, we also get that Norse mythology we talked about. You get Homer, so you get your ancient Greece there. All of these things, as if you were mentioning earlier, are all coming together. And so I do love the idea that maybe it isn't as much of their influence, like we often say, and more of they're just influenced by the same things, right? And then here's the last paragraph, much less weighty, but a lot of fun. I don't think a marshwiggle is like a hobbit. We have no other context for that. That's just how it started. Like there was nothing else about marshwiggles and hobbits. But I don't think a marshwiggle is like a hobbit. The hobbit is essentially a cheerful, complacent, sanguine little creature. If Puddleglum is like any of Tolkien's creatures, I'd call him a good Gollum. Thanks for all the kind things you say. Yours sincerely, C.S. Lewis. So there you have it there. Puddleglum is the good Gollum. And I'm like, they do kind of look alike, right? Like,
yeah.
One's short, but they're both kind of froggy.
Yeah, froggy, fish a lot.
Frog face, isn't that what Puddleglum gets called? Yeah. I think that's a slur. I don't think you can say that.
You cannot say that.
Like in Narnia, that's clearly not something you're supposed to say.
Like in Grand Budapest Hotel. Well, how's that supposed to make me feel?
Well, I just thought that was kind of fun to include those here at the end.
Yeah.
A good Gollum. I also it's so fun to me to be like Tolkien. I mean, Lewis knew who Gollum was. I know, of course he did, because they got to know each other. But it's just weird for him to like acknowledge it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's
outside of the story. It's kind of funny.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, why don't you go ahead? This has been so much fun going over this, but I think it's time for us to wrap things up. So why don't you go ahead and read our end credits?
Absolutely. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can then listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Andrew Trophy, Becca Brown, Christiana Lyon, and Ian Wooten for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to hello@lampostlistener.com. Voicemails can be left at 406-646-6733. And you can also find previous episodes, links, and book information at lampostlistener.com. A review on Apple Podcasts would also help other listeners find the show. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back soon.